Welcome to the Thinking Tackle podcast. Now, if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Today, I am joined in the studio by Mr. Tom Stokes and Mr. Elliott Gray to talk all things summer prep, summer baiting, summer spots. Bit of a topical one for you. So, lads, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Rich.
Good morning.
Good to see your handsome faces across the table. And we are going to talk, we're going to do a bit of a topical one, which is a bit of a break from the norm. So, I know you guys have both had good springs, but we're going to talk about the period coming out of spring and into summer because it is something that I don't fully understand it. You guys have seen your fair share of spring into summer, so I really want to get to grips with baiting, the things that carp need coming out of this period. You know, they've just spawned on most waters. So does your approach change, Tom, from that sort of spring period into the first of the real hot weather?
Definitely. Obviously, in the spring, generally, although I do bait spots in the spring to some degree, I wouldn't say I bait them heavily. It's more sort of light prep, bit of salt, bit of crumb. In the spring, I think the key generally is just being on them. You know, being mobile, reacting to what you see. You know, bright ones, whatever, small handfuls of bait, exactly where they need to be. A lot of the time, that's how I feel. You know, that's all I feel like you need to do a lot of the time in the spring. But post spawning, especially on the sort of bigger, lower stock lakes, but I mean on any lake really, but that's just generally what I'm more used to, like those type of lakes. Pre-baiting is obviously it's a massive edge. It can be the difference between catching nothing and catching, you know, a handful of fish a trip if you're lucky. But yeah, that's the major difference I'd say in my angling. Post spawning, I very much rely on pre-baiting areas and trying to get something going as such.
Yeah, do you think pre-baiting is still important to you now you've got more time?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. I've definitely done it a lot less the last couple of years. Obviously, when I had less time and my sort of what I'd do in the summer when I had less time, obviously I was fishing weekends, I'd pick an area that I'd seen fish activity in, etc., but not necessarily the most popular areas of the lake. And you know, by baiting it, I'd create an opportunity in those areas, basically training the carp to come to those areas. Having less time, that worked in my favour. Whereas now, having more time on my hands, I can get in the sort of going swims, shall we say. I have noticed that I have done a little less bait in the last couple of years, like I say, simply because the time I've got and the time, you know, I fish midweek now, so I've just got more chance of getting in going swims. That doesn't mean I don't bait, but it's definitely something that I've noticed I've done less of. But I'd imagine a lot of people listening to this probably are weekend anglers, and you know, it's definitely something I'd recommend doing if you've got, you know, it takes a little bit of effort. Obviously, it takes a little bit of time in itself. But yeah, in the summer, it's a massive edge. If you can get bait in on an area and get some consistency, you know, it really can be a game changer. Okay. But you are right in the sense that since I've got more time, I haven't felt like I've needed to do as much because obviously on any lake you have got going swims. Those going swims naturally see bait and angling pressure. So it's almost like the other anglers are sort of baiting them for you, and you just, you know, but I never had that privilege before. You know, I couldn't turn up on a Thursday or a Friday and get in the going swims. I had to make the most of what I could elsewhere.
Okay, we're going to talk a bit about how you find those sort of spots to concentrate on in a bit. But El, are you aware of do you think it's a cultural thing within carp angling, or is there a genuine reason why you would switch from, let's say, a boilie or a very, very light baiting approach to a seed approach or come the summer?
I think for me personally, a large amount of my bait choice is dictated by where I fish, what I'm aiming to achieve, and what other people are doing. I think on a lake, on the type of lakes that I have often fished, small, busy, being different is really important. If everyone's using seed, there's every chance I won't be. If everyone's using boilies, there's every chance I won't be. Doing something different, big or small, in terms of the lake, is always is always a good thing. The good thing for me about seed, fishing in particular, which you referenced, is the way that you can clean spots. Like a lot of my fishing, particularly over the last 5 years or so, is pretty much hard on the deck. Don't pop up fish that often. And I'm always looking for small, really clean, regularly visited spots. If you bait with boilies, it doesn't take birds long to demolish them. It doesn't take carp, tench. It doesn't take anything long. When you start applying those smaller seeds, for me, it ticks boxes. You've got it takes longer for anything to clear it, whether it's carp or birds. The spots become cleaner. You know, you can put 2 handfuls of hemp on a spot. Them 2 handfuls do a lot. They do a lot of work for you there. 2 handfuls of boilies, like I say, 2 tufties can turn up and that's gone in seconds. So I think that's the main advantage of seed. I don't necessarily think that boilie crumb wouldn't do the same thing, but I've always used particle. I've used it loads over the years, and you can just do a lot with it. Like I say, it ticks a lot of boxes.
So why do you think there is this shift? Because I think a lot of lads we know and a lot of lads we work with will go from predominantly a boilie approach, and then all of a sudden there'll be a switch flicked and they'll be starting to cook tigers up, they'll be starting to cook hemp up, there'll be salt going on, there'll be party blend, that kind of thing. Why do they do that?
I don't really know. I think mass baiting. If you want to put a lot of bait out, for example, let's say you wanted to put the quantities out that I would put out if I was going to do quite a heavy baiting campaign, you're talking throughout the summer months, you're talking like 100 key a month. It's not very achievable for a lot of people. Some anglers you'll see put 100 key a week out. It's only 4 buckets of bait. Sounds like a lot, but when you're just chucking it in, going home for a few days, you know, I think a lot of it could be down to the fact that boilie is expensive. And I think a lot of the time it is for spot clearing. When people are putting that seed in and that, I think a lot of it is it's longevity. They want it out there. They want it to last. They want it to do a job for the time that you're away from the lake. That's how I've always looked at it. It's like, I want to put the bait in on a Thursday or whatever day it is, come back in 3 or 4 days time. I don't want all that bait to have been eaten by Friday morning. I want it there for the duration that I'm not there. And a seed approach is far better suited to that than a boilie approach, in my opinion.
Does that mean that you are the ultimate sort of point you want to take your spots to is this incredibly clean?
Yes.
And you feel that's where you're most confident?
I personally would like my spots to be kept small. I don't actually like a massive. Again, it all goes down to the kind of lakes that you're fishing, but a lot of the lakes I fish or have fished in the last have been quite small lakes. Therefore, the smaller the spot, the harder it is to find, the harder it is for someone else to land on. I've always paid loads of attention to finding the smallest spots I can. Like, no spot is too small. If anything, they can be too big. If you want to bait an area that's massive, it's obvious, and it's in the most popular swim. On a lake like that, it's pointless. You're not going to get the best out of your baiting. There's going to be other lines through it. People are going to be fishing it. You know, it can work for you still, but it can work against you at the same time. So, I want the spots I'm fishing to be kept as small as they can with it, but also have as much bait on them as I feel like they need. Small, clean, so I can fish, you know, really accurately, pinpoint every time, or hard on the deck. That's how I like to, given the choice, that's how I like to fish. And
I want to contrast how you find those spots with what you're seeing this year, Tom, on the likes of Stoneacres, where you're able to use the boat. But it's starting with you on that one, El. I've seen you plumb. You're very, very, you spend more
Hours.
time than most.
Yeah.
Is that because you're looking for these absolutely tiny beginnings of a spot?
I've just come to learn over the years. I've seen it so many times on the lakes that I've fished. People are like, "Oh, that swim's weeded up, it's unfishable." And the minute, and I've heard because the lakes I fish are busy. You talk to a lot of people. You see patterns in people's angling. If you see a lake, if you fish a lake where hardly anyone fishes it, there could be loads of swims that don't get attention. But I've seen it so many times. That swim's unfishable. That swim's too weedy. Blah blah blah. One, carp love weed, so if it's really weedy, they're probably going to be there. If it's not getting fished, they're definitely going to be there. And there's always spots. No matter what you think, there's always spots. Like, I remember we actually did a film at Sandhurst years ago, really weedy area, and I found what I thought was like pretty much the only spot in that swim. I was happy as Larry, caught quite a lot of fish off of it. When we put the drone up at the end of the session, there were actually more of them spots. They're all very small, but they're there if you can be bothered to find them. And it, you know, at times it is painful, it's boring, it's annoying. It's not leading up for hours in weed isn't the most fun, but I just think, you know, if you can find them,
You love it, mate.
I do. But I do like doing it because I know what's at the end.
Yeah.
I know that. I spoke to Tom a bit about this recently. Like, I'm not the best opportunist angler. I can catch carp in that way. I don't like fishing in that way. I don't want to turn up to the lake looking for opportunities every day. I just think you end up chasing your tail. Half the time, you won't be able to get on them. You know, don't get me wrong. There's some anglers who are particularly good at it. I'm not one of them. I don't class myself as someone that can or wants to turn up to the lake looking for an opportunity every time he's there. I like to have things set up, prepped, and a lot of work goes into that, whether it's the spot finding at the start, the bait in itself. But that's how I prefer to fish. And, you know, that leading up is always the base of that. Everything starts with a leading rod, a bare lead, and then from there you build.
Now, Tom, this spring you've been on Stone Acres. This is your first spring, I think.
Yeah.
This means you're able to look at spots from the boat. Does that mean that your approach to what you're looking for and what you're happy with has changed?
Well, it's a tough one because I'll be honest, obviously I fished Stone Acres this spring. The first few I caught were on zigs. And I've only recently just caught a few off the bottom. I did a few trips fishing on the bottom prior to catching a couple, but the lake was so busy, I never really felt like I was on them. I found areas that looked like they'd been fed on, but I'd missed the boat, the carp weren't there. You know, however good those spots look, if the carp aren't there, you're not going to catch them. But the few I did catch recently off the bottom, obviously I saw them showing in a particular area of the lake one morning. I went out there, I found two areas, and it was so obvious that they'd been recently fed on. In fact, the one area where I'd seen the majority of the shows, I sort of waited for the shows to subside about 10 o'clock, went out there, and you could tell they'd been out there. All the weed was flattened out. There's a small area of silt amongst the weed. You could see these little white like bits of shells amongst it. The weed was all flattened down around it. And in the water column above the area, there was bits of weed with the roots on still. As soft as it is, I knew that was going to be a goer before I even put a rig on it. So much so, you've allowed 4 rods on Stonies, and that spot where they'd been showing looked that good. I was going to fish with just 1 rod. I didn't want to go out and disturb the area, but I had a quick scoot a bit further along the island, and I found another good area, good looking area. So I actually ended up fishing 2 rods, and I caught on both, but it was so obvious. It was obvious that spot was going to be a goer, but you haven't usually got that kind of advantage where you can go out there and look. Generally, if you're casting from the bank, you've just got to look for signs, see them showing. You've then got to let it up. Bubbling's always a dead giveaway. I've often found in the past, see these spots as well, it's been an eye-opener this spring on Stone Acres because it shows, I've really seen how a lake and spots develop throughout the spring. Early on in the spring when I started in April, the whole lake virtually had no spots. The carp were active, they were awake, but the whole bottom's covered in silkweed. Nothing looked particularly fed on. You can see why that time of the year, early in the spring, people chucking single bright ones on chods and hinges is such an effective method because they haven't really turned anything over on the bottom. It was an eye-opener to see that. And then as the spring progressed, more started getting caught off the bottom and spots would start to appear. And as I say, those spots, I could tell that they'd been showing there that morning and they were freshly turned over. And those, obviously it's a lot harder to see that from the bank, but those are the spots that I believe, these freshly turned over ones that the carp have created themselves, they're always the best spots, aren't they? Yeah. Not every swim on every lake, but most lakes, especially in the main swims, you've got, that spot, 27 wraps out to that tree. Oh, there's that spot. Don't get me wrong, you will catch carp off of those spots, but without doubt, the spots I've always found to be the best and the most productive are fresh spots that aren't particularly known about, that you jump on first and you can get on them first before anyone else clocks them. And I've even caught them from areas of weed, areas of weed where I'm just getting a drop, and I've baited it, and over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, they've created a spot there, and they are always the best areas. Like, you know, just going in and again, going back to the whole baiting thing as well. I know I'm going a bit off subject here, but just going in and baiting somewhere on a whim as well, just because it looks nice there, or so-and-so caught them from here 2 years ago or whatever. That very well, again, I'm talking about obviously higher stock lakes, you probably catch them from anywhere as long as you bait. But on the lower stock lakes, let the carp show you where to bait. My best results have always been from areas that they have basically, you know, I've seen them in, I've seen a bit of bubbling. Like I say, I might have had a lead about then, I might be getting a drop through the weed, but nothing's clear. But knowing, you know, having had results from those areas in the past, I won't be afraid to just find the best drop I can get amongst that weed, closest to where I've seen them feeding, bait it, and the carp will, again, going back to the seed, you know, this is another reason why seed is so effective. You know, you put out a bucket of seed, and you know, they'll feed on that for days on end, and they'll mow it down for you. You can come back a week later, and all of a sudden you can get great drops, and you're fishing exactly where you need to be effectively. Nobody else on that lake will know about that spot because it's not a known spot as such.
Is near enough good enough in that sense, though? Like you just said, then put it near where you've seen them feed.
Yeah, to a degree. Obviously, the closer you can get to them,
we can't all see those little beginnings of a spot.
No. But yeah, sometimes near enough has to be good enough. But a lot of the time, you know, when I've seen carp, when I've had good results in the past, you know, a lot of the time the carp have shown me exactly where I need to put that bait. Like, I'll see them shown one morning, and I'll clock a little bit of fizzing where one's obviously feeding on the deck, and I'll wait for it to subside, and I'll have a lead about in that area later, and funnily enough, that'll be the one area out of a massive area of weed that I'm like, oh, I'm getting a bit of a drop there, you know, and then it just goes, you know, like I say, the carp, if you look hard enough, the carp will tell you where you need to put it.
It's quite nice, really. Good that we had Tim Paisley in the other week, and one of the things that he's always written about, and it's good to hear that, you know, people have the same experiences this much down the line. Rod had told him, find where they feed.
Yeah.
Nothing else is important. Like, they'll show you. There's certain type of feeding show. That's where they're feeding, and that's all that's important. But in terms of, I kind of feel like I remember we did a piece for SIP with you about your Dorchester fishing. We kind of talked about that in detail. And in my head, as he's talking about this, I'm thinking when you were doing that weekender thing, probably the kind of seed baiting was at its most potent for you.
Yeah.
And I feel a little bit like when you went out on that island, you'd seen them fizzing up from memory, and that was, it all kind of came together around what became, I guess, the way you fished at the time, that bait in the seed bait. And you know where, just explain the circumstances around it without obviously giving too much away from taking away from our story. But, you know, talk to us a little bit about the fact that you're nowhere near a lot of the lakes you fished on.
Yeah. So basically, obviously, everywhere I've generally fished over the last 10 years or more has been at least an hour and a half, if not 2 hours, away from home. Obviously, I'm in a different position now, but you know, prior to Korda, I was a weekender. I had 2 nights a week through the majority of the year. I had 20 days a year annual leave, so I'd book those at the prime time in the summer months. I'd have every Friday off. With 20 days leave, you can have like 5 months of the summer working, you know, 4 days a week fishing free. So I'd get there on a Thursday, and obviously the whole baiting thing, it worked perfectly for me because I could bait heavy on a Sunday. Obviously, you'd have to put that time and effort into baiting, depending on the range of the spot. Sometimes I'd spend up to 4.5, 5 hours putting out these big buckets of seed on these areas. But then, you know, again, like I mentioned before, I'd pick lesser areas because the last thing you want to, lesser fished areas, because the last thing you want to do is bait a swim that you're not going to get in, or potentially be lining it up for someone else to catch them. And by leaving the lake for that 4 days, they had 4 days where they could come in on that bait, they could feed, no lines in the area. And I'd turn up on a Thursday evening, get the rigs out, and a lot of time that first night, it depended on the lake, you know, but sometimes I'd catch 2 or 3 the first morning, depending on the lake and the stock. And then I might get one or two more. But I could almost tell as well over the course of, say, a 3-night trip on the weekend, that the first morning generally would always be the best chance, because they've had like the whole week to build the confidence up on the spot. It's not very often that they're doing. A lot of people are just bait and fish, so they're instantly coming into an area. The lines are there. They know, they're wary. They never feed as confidently and as heavily when they're wary. But that, the way I was doing it, I'd let them build the confidence up all week. I'd go there, I'd put a couple of rigs on the bait on a Thursday night, catch a few. But then over the course of the weekend, I'd noticed they'd sort of push away again a bit, where they obviously realised, oh, hang on, a couple of my mates have been up to you. But then you get to the Sunday and you start the whole process again. You rebait, you give them a load more bait. That's another thing. Generally, I know people will happily go down and put half a bucket out a bucket over 3 rods, but there's not many people. It's not very often, unless you're heavy baiting and you're very heavily invested in an area, that they're coming across quantities of bait. I mean, I'm talking, I've done the, what did Dorchester have in it? Like 9 fish at that time, something like that, a lot of tench. And I'm putting in 2 buckets of seed. That's 30 kilos plus a bait. It's not very often they're coming across that quantity of bait. Nobody's going and fishing over that. But no, like I say, at that time and for the time I had, it was the perfect scenario. They'd almost be queuing up, waiting for me to return. Like I say, now I've got more time. It doesn't work so well now, because it's hard, Now, like, if I bait a spot and I'm on the lake and I see fish on it, I want to fish it. I can't say like, I'm just going to sit on my hands for 4 days and let them get the confidence up, But, I've got other advantages now, and I've got the time. Like I say, I can get in areas where I need to be more, whereas I couldn't before. But yeah, for having less time, that was the one. That was the one, yeah.
I always look at your fishing now, and obviously we talk a lot about it when you're out there. You're a big thinker about how things are going to come together on a spot, and I think a lot of that feels to me like a lot of that's down to the fact that your fishing in Essex largely has been such busy waters, small waters.
I think that's actually one of my favourite parts about fishing, is like the thinking that I do when I'm not there, when I am. It's always about the bigger picture, how things are going to come together. And I think what Tom has just spoken about in terms of not baiting an area just kind of for the sake of it. I pretty much bait all year, whether it's spring, summer, autumn, winter. The quantities, what I bait with, blah, 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 that all changes. But spring into summer is the easiest and the best time to allow the fish to tell you. And the early part of the autumn, when the fish are active, from spring till say that as autumn dips away, that period, but particularly the end of summer into the early autumn and the end of spring into the early summer, those 2 times, the signs are there, and you will see fish. I think it's easy to see fish showing regularly, and there's one. But if you actually really think about where they're showing, you'll see patterns in. I can think of loads of instances where I've seen a lot of carp show one morning, but there'll be one area where I saw 4 or 5 show. The other 15 were spread. That area where there was 5 that all slid out over the same mark, that's where you want to investigate. And often there'll be something, I've seen it out the trees. I've seen fish. It doesn't always have to be from the bank. I've seen fish cruising along, and then they dip down out, and you see that out of a tree, and you think, what are they doing there? Line it all up, go back to the swim, or even let it from the bank you're on. There'll be spots there, but something Tom said, like them, if you can get on the early part of them developing a spot, because they don't last forever either. I think a lot of the time, I've had it plenty of times, like a spot in the spring, by the time the summer's, or a close season, obviously a close season can change a lot. I've had this, you come back, the spot's totally gone. You can't just find a spot, bait it all year. A lot of the time, a lot changes. Sometimes they just stop using areas, but investing your time wisely in terms of let them tell you where to put your bait there. Do your thing, capitalize on that situation, because it's probably going to end. But the spring into the summer, that summer period, you get your big weed beds. The fish use areas more, and they will always show you where to 9 times out of 10 they are going to show you, and it's probably not. If there's a main spot in that swim, I'd be surprised if that's where they were nutting out every morning, unless it's old bait. But if you take the rest of that swim or the rest of that lake, the areas they're making, it's not going to be those spots.
So as soon as you find a spot, I kind of feel like someone like you are looking at the next 6 weeks, what moons there are, how you feel the spot is likely to develop to the point beyond which it becomes less good again.
Yeah.
Maybe it takes more than 6 weeks, but you know what I mean? You're probably seeing the life of a spot in front of you, and you're trying to plan when you're going to be. I'm thinking like Match Pit, you were very analytical about when you needed to be there and how the spot should develop during the time.
Certain lakes, I think you have to be. Like one thing I've never done, really, is bait a spot and not fish it. And I know people do that. I've never really done that. I.e. find a spot, bait it for like 4 weeks, because on the places I've generally fished, I don't feel like I actually can risk that. It's going to get fished, it's going to get seen, you're going to get seen. So you've got to kind of, that's why I like the spots to be small. You've got to capitalise on the small windows. Like Tom, you may have, because you fish bigger lakes, maybe you feel like you can get away with baiting areas for longer. I've never done it that way. And I think, as in bait it 1 week, then bait it the next, and then fish it on the 4th week. I've never done that kind of baiting. I don't know if I'd want to. Do you do that? Have you done that?
You're the same. Interesting. It's interesting. I can feel. I can think of a couple of periods a couple of times where I've baited spots for a couple of weeks before putting rigs on it, and that was solely because I've had other spots going on the lake. I'm more so baiting those areas, knowing, like, you know, on these bigger low stock pits, like you just mentioned about weed growth, etc., and spots fizzling out. You know, although you can get something rocking, you can't rely on that forever. You've still got to have you've still got to be thinking of that next move, because the fish are going to move. You know, as weed beds hit the surface elsewhere, the fish are likely to move. They're going to stop using areas so much. But yeah, I forgot where I was going with that.
No, just being able to bait it. Like, I remember I talked to Miles. Miles Gibson, for example, would always talk to me about, I baited this area for like weeks on end, and I'm like, really? You haven't fished it? He's like, no, I'm baiting it. But I've never done
I
that.
genuinely think, from what I've seen in the past when I've been baiting, if you leave it for 4 weeks or whatever, you can miss
a lot.
A golden period. The spot, I've always found with spots, they will, obviously you start baiting them, they will hit a peak where you have your best results, usually a couple of 3 weeks down the line, when the spots are just right. You know, they're clean enough to present on the bottom, but they're not so clean. And then generally, once you've reached that peak of, where you might be catching, it all depends on the lake and the stock, but, it depends on what you're catching, but they'll reach a peak and then they'll start to fade away as a few of their mates have been caught off the spot's becoming cleaner, they're just naturally becoming more wary of that area. I know if you've not fished it, they're not, and they've not been caught off it, but I do think personally that you could be missing a golden opportunity there.
I think you can go from, certainly mine, I've often fished smaller lakes, therefore everything is more available to me in terms of observation. If it's massive, you can't see what's going in all the parts of the lake, but the lakes I've often fished, being smaller in the most part, I've always felt like I can go from one spot straight to another area the minute I feel that dies, as long as you're observant enough. Find a new area in a new place where those carp are now, bait it once, and then literally just start catching, or just kind of pick up where you left off in one swim in a totally different area without the need to bait it for weeks. But it all goes back to letting the carp tell you where they want to be. If you're not catching on your spot anymore, they've moved, they're going to be eating somewhere else. Start again there. And you can just go, bang, I'm not baiting that spot anymore, I'm doing it here now, and you can catch.
I think that's in what you just said there. The sort of spots we're both looking for are spots where we've seen carp, we know they're feeding there, the opportunities are already there before we've baited it. So we bait it and we want to get on that, the carp are already using that area, whereas if you're perhaps baiting somewhere that you've not potentially seen them in, it's just an area they're like, that's when I suppose people are giving it 4 weeks.
Some people do that, don't they?
To
give them 6 weeks.
Give them chance to come into the area, find the bait. But from what we've just said, neither of us are looking for those kind of, well, it's not really, you're creating an opportunity there, whereas
Yes.
we're looking for opportunities and looking to make the most of them. And I don't want to feed them for 4 weeks, go there and potentially miss the boat,
Tom, talk to me about it with that in mind, this idea that you might bait a couple of spots with a view to the next move. When you're pinned somewhere voluntarily, let's say, like Speedboat on Burfield, in your mind, have you got a time limit within which you've got to catch everything you need to catch off that spot before it gets too big? And would you bait somewhere else within that swim, knowing that that's where you wanted to be?
Yes, Speedboat was a bit of a different swim to most the other swims. Speedboat on Burfield was a different sort of scenario to most of the scenarios I've had elsewhere, in that it's a passing point, and through the latter part of the summer, there's a snaggy channel that the carp, every single day of the summer, the warmer months up until October, there's a certain amount of carp in Burfield that will naturally move out of the open water throughout the morning, and they want to get in this snaggy channel between the islands, out the way of the boats. So you always had this natural passage of fish. I was using a bait boat that naturally keeps the spots smaller, even though they were at long range. Spomming naturally makes the spots bigger. By using the bait boat, it kept them small. And because you always had that natural passage of fish, there was a good period of the year where I felt like, they were pretty consistently catchable off those areas. Whereas other spots that I've fished, Englefield or whatever, for instance, or even on Burfield, that weren't sort of passing points like that, interception points, shall I say, you're relying on the weed growth more so. That the fish will move into areas because of the weed and it's matured there. And then you might have a 6-week window where the carp are regularly in that area, and then they move off. But yeah, that was a little bit of a different swim. Speedboat. It was a flipping great swim. Elliott's thinking stop talking about Burfield.
But does that mean that the baiting becomes less important if you're on their patrol routes? You're trap setting rather than
it was. But I still think the baiting was important because it created. There's a lot of people that have gone in speedboat over the years, caught odd ones. But you can't beat that consistency. If you are constantly baiting an area through, like pretty much from April and May, really, and the start of June until they'd spawn, I'd bait those spots with a bait boat, but it was just crumb and salt. Not loads, I didn't want to overdo it, but it was enough to keep the spots clean, give them something to touch down on. But as soon as they'd spawn, I'd bait them both heavy. Even if I didn't fish in there, I'd bait. And I think that, fish swim past every day, and every day they've got a lovely banquet of seed and tiger nuts and a few boilies down there, and you're training them basically. That 4 days a week they could eat that happily, no line on it. And it literally got to the point. I mean, I've had this many times, and it's a very rare thing in big carp fishing on these low stock lakes. But if you do it right and you do it well at the right time of the year, it becomes that easy that all you need is a rig on that spot on the right time. It gets to a point where it's like, all I need to do is go down there, put my rig on that spot. You've trained the carp to come in, they feed, and chances are you're going to catch one or two. Or
I think consistency is
way
more important than quantity. I've the edge fishing I do throughout the summer, you look like you don't need the quantity, but like some lakes, you can have like 5, 6 or 7 spots go. Like I'll literally, once I've fished a lake for a while, if I know they use the edges, you'll see some lakes it'll be 2 areas, some lakes it might be 10, but do one lap as often as you could. Do a lap a day or a lap every other day with one bucket of bait, and you go 2 handfuls on that one, 2 handfuls on that one, 2 handfuls on that one. You will see that one snag they use when it blows northerly, one snag they use more when it blows southwesterly, but the bait's always going, whether and then you're only putting handfuls in. You haven't got to do loads, but you've got spots teed up all around the lake, and with big quantities of bait out in the lake, you can't really do that. That like one of the beauties I've always found with the edge fishing, one of the reasons I love it so much is you can literally just see what's going on. You can see the tiniest little polished off areas. It's still those signs you're looking for out in the lake. Let the carp tell you where they want to eat, where they want to be. It's the same thing, but that it's still baiting. It's still the same bait, but it's a very different style, and it can be equally as, you're never going to catch, or other sound, you're never going to get that sort of 4 or 5 fish in the morning that you might get out in the lake. But if you're willing to stay on your toes, you could get 3 in the morning, 3 different swims, or a different swim every day that week. That's all down to the same thing: letting the carp tell you where they want to be, and baiting and training them, or just reminding them that if there's going to be food there.
Yeah, I mean, it's relevant to you. I want to talk a little bit, Al, about. I know it was an ill-fated campaign in the end, but the match pit one always sticks with me because it coincided with the period when you were unable to really fish anything at times other than mornings. So actually, quite the converse to what we were talking about with Tom on Stonies. You had to train him to within a couple of hour window.
Literally,
because you just had your
first
Arthur
baby.
Maybe, so
so I thought there, like, that would be not a nail in the coffin. Sorry, Arthur, I don't mean it. But you know, for someone like me, who I like, when I'm fishing, I like to be fishing. I like it to consume me. The thought of that, I was like, shit. You know, this has the potential to really knock my fishing on the head, especially in the fact that all of a sudden, you can't do nights for even a month. But actually, in hindsight, I caught probably more carp fishing those morning sessions than I would if I was sitting static, because every day you're baiting all around the lake. Every day you turn up with a fresh head. You turn up in the morning, first light, when everyone else is in bed, because you've only got a little window, so you're there crack of dawn, ready. You've driven there. Everyone else might have just been getting out their bed. They ain't going to reel in their rods and start looking around the lake. They're not going to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, look out, see the wind is trickling up the other end and go, oh, reel in and go and have a look down there. But turning up to the lake at that time, seeing the wind was trickling down there, knowing I've got a spot baited down there, you walk down there in the half light, and you think, oh my God, opportunity. You'd never see that. So that period, as much as I thought it would have been a bad period, wasn't. It was actually really good. Caught loads of fish from loads of different areas, but loads of fish that I would never have caught if I was still able to just fish my 2 or 3. Because you can't really be that way unless you like people on the car park lake, like Mad Martin, for example. He caught so many carp out of there because he was, even though he could have done 2 or 3 nights, he hadn't. That wasn't in the equation for him. It was all about bait all the spots, turn up every day with a fresh head. One morning there may not be an opportunity, but you bait all your spots again. You come back the next day, like that. It's a very different approach, but again, the consistency is key. If you've only got 1 day a week where you can visit the lake, you've only got 1 morning a week you can fish the lake, chances are you ain't going to catch a lot. That's the consistency, whether it's in baiting or fishing, is such a important part of fishing. Unless the lake is empty or devoid of anglers and you've got the whole thing to yourself. But if you're competing, like, that consistency in baiting and in fishing is really important. But
let's talk about what we're baiting with, guys. I'm sure you have similar thoughts, but everyone does it differently. I love the idea that like prep particle wise is fun, isn't it? Like it's another hobby in itself, really. I'm sure you spent half your time boiling stuff up, Tom, and the same, El.
I don't think I'd ever use pre-prepped particle.
No.
Even if someone wanted to pay me to use it, I'd say no.
I've seen a lot of prepared particle over the years, and don't get me wrong, some of it's very good quality, but it's never as good, I don't think, as what you do yourself. You put so much love and attention in it. And I know nobody else that's selling it en masse is doing it quite the same way. Plus, there's certain ways I like to prepare my seed that I'm sure other people don't do. Like I always cook my hemp first, and then a lot of the water out of the hemp I'll put in my pigeon conditioner and then cook that. So whether it makes a difference or not, but I like the idea of all the pigeon conditioner drawing in all that sort of oily water from the hemp. I always like to leave them sat in a bit of water. Whereas generally prepared particles come dry, which I think having them in that, I put a lot of rock salt in it once it's cooked, which obviously not only makes it more attractive, I believe, it also preserves it for longer. Yeah, like I say, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good quality particle on the market, but it's never as good as what you can make yourself.
And you prefer it fresh, Tom, for instance?
Generally, yeah. I mean, tiger nuts. I've used tiger nuts that are 6 months old, but yeah, in terms of seed and that, I generally do prefer it fresh to a degree. Obviously, in the last few years, I have started adding a lot of rock salt to it, which will preserve it for weeks on end. But yeah, generally, my best results have always come when I'm doing it fresh every week. It sort of becomes like a routine. You know, you're walking, you bait on a Sunday. I mean, I'm saying this now. I haven't done this obviously for a couple of years, but my old routine would have been I'd bait on a Sunday, you know, I'd wind in at 10, 11 o'clock, I'd take my kit back to the van, I'd get my buckets of bait, I'd go back to the swim or swims, depending on how many swims or spots I was baiting. Bait, you drive home on a Sunday and literally as you unload the kit out the van, you are instantly putting more seed in the buckets, putting water on them to give them a couple of days to soak, and then, you know, then I'd have a specific day. Yeah, usually like a Wednesday where I'd come home from work, I'd spend the whole evening cooking all my seed again. You know, it's almost a constant thing. You know, you're almost doing some kind of prep every single day, but that's all part of it. I do miss it in a sense, because something else that's important to get in that I reckon, I'll add it now before I forget about it, is, and this is potentially another reason I don't do it so much anymore, angling etiquette. Obviously, I used to finish my fishing on a Sunday afternoon. Because I was a weekender, Sunday I'd be packing up, but so would virtually everybody else on the lake. So all these spots over the years that I've done really well off, baiting heavily, I'd always be baiting them on a Sunday afternoon when everybody else had gone home. Now, I fish Monday to Friday generally. So when I'm packing up on a Friday, there are a lot of other people there. You know, you got a lot of the weekend, and I'm not the one I'm not going to start putting in 30 kilos of bait when somebody else is setting up next to you or somebody's fishing opposite you. You know, baiting's all well and good, but don't upset other anglers by doing it. You know, you've got to have a bit of etiquette. If you're in the fortunate position where you live close enough to the lake that you can nip down in the week and one evening there's hardly anyone there, like the spots that Elliot was just talking about in the edge, you can get away with them. You know, generally if there's a few people there, they're all fishing out in the pond, no one's going to mind you chucking a few handfuls of bait on an edge spot here and an edge spot there. But yeah, just be conscious of other anglers. I always was, but I was always fortunate in, like I say, it'd be a Sunday afternoon. Generally, everyone's gone home. Lakes like Burfield are very broken up, so generally, even if there was people fishing, it's not like you're baiting in an area that's going to affect them. But yeah, that's probably another reason why I don't do it so much now, is because generally I'm packing up on a Friday, midday, and a lot of the weekenders are already turning up. A, I don't want them to see where I'm baiting, and B, I'm not going to fill it in when someone's potentially coming in the swim straight after me.
There's a lot to baiting. Like it's a very.
Would you say you're a masturbator?
I do like mass baiting. Like, it ain't just he's throwing loads of like there is, like Tom says, you go home. Like I'm doing it in a minute. I go home. I'm like, all right, Jem, just gonna sort my gear out. Every like half an hour, I'm back in and out the house. She's like, what are you doing? Turning the Burko off, refilling the Burko, doing this, like, there's that. There's in the years gone by, as I've alluded to many times already, busy lakes. The amount of times I've driven to the lake, some lakes I fished at a car park, I can see from the road. I will literally just drive to the lake. If I see the cars in the car, I don't even go through the gate because I know I just can't do it. You know, some places you're turning up like throughout the winter. Sometimes I just do it. I go there at midnight because if there is an angler there, I can do it in the dark when they're probably asleep. But many times you're trying to keep that regimented every 2 days or every 3 days, whatever it is. And if it's out in the lake, one, you don't want to upset people. You don't want, but two, you don't want them to know. You don't want them to know that that's a real big thing.
You can be quite sneaky.
You have to have that, like especially on that kind of lake, because sometimes there's, you've got every Tom, Dick and Harry fishing. It might be a club water. They have got no qualms about just going, oh, he baited up there. Like, I'll just fish there. Like, and it can take 3 or 4 visits to the lake just to put one bucket of bait out. It's not. I think I've had people in the past be like, do you reckon you'd catch anything if you didn't pre-bait? As if like I'm cheating, like as if they don't count because I'm baiting, and I'm just like, mate, you like.
No, I'm putting more effort in, mate.
Yeah,
not less. Yeah.
if you think that, why don't you just do it as well? Like, but yeah, it's not as, like you say, like Tom's saying, if you've got to spom it at long range, you can take hours, even carting it about the lake on a big lake. Like there's a lot to it. It's a lot, and to keep it consistent, especially if it's not 10 minutes from your house, can be quite difficult,
No, I'm not letting you off the hook either, Al. Like, Tom's given, been quite honest about your bait there. I don't expect you to tell me everything, but in terms of the way what you're doing with your particle and what you are using.
It's funny, I was going to laugh as he was saying this, right? I have never really been...
You don't use like Red Bull or sugar or salt or nothing like that?
Sometimes I don't soak them. Sometimes, like tigers, I don't even cook them. I've soaked them for long.
Not got him.
No, like soak them for 5 days, 6 days. Yeah. Like I've gone through all sorts of periods. Sometimes I soak my hemp, sometimes I don't. I just chuck it straight in the thing and cook it. I've never had a kind of regimented approach to how I would prep them. I've never salted them, never done that. I always, whatever particle is, I use them like as they come. The mixing of the water and that, yeah, if I've took all the hemp out, I'll put the tigers in with it, but I don't do it like I must do that.
No.
If there ain't enough water to, once it's gone in the buckets to cover the hemp, if there's none left, I'm not worried. Like but again, that's just me. A lot of the time, I just find myself, I have to do it there and then. I'm making sure I turn up to the lake with bait. I'm not always the most prepped in advance. Like, got 2 kids, things get in the way, and I just, as long as it's ready to use, whether it's been soaked for 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, I would literally sometimes cooked and finished the minute I leave the house. A lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like the other day before I went fishing, I was at home all day gardening. I was like, right, I need to sort my bait. I thought, no, I'll do it tonight. It's fine. And I was supposed to go fishing at 4 o'clock in the morning. Left it till last minute, like 9, half 9 at night. Had to do loads of bait, and my Burko kept shorting out my electrics on the house. So I'd put the Burko on, go upstairs. I'm now to the point where we're watching telly and Mrs. end up in bed. Give it half hour. I'm like, I better check that Burko. Go downstairs. It's now like 11:30. Burko's gone off again. Turn it back on. Go back upstairs to bed. Now my missus has gone to sleep. I've only got like 1 bucket of bait's worth done. 1 Burko's done. By the time I'd actually finished and the thing had stopped shorting out, I think it was like 1:15 in the morning. And every time I go down, and basically where I hadn't, if anyone uses an extension lead, apparently you have to unravel the whole lead.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they heat up. So when I was feeling the cable, I was like, fucking hell, this is nearly melting. Turns out that was why. But that lastminute.com approach to the baiting or having my bait prepped on that day cost me, because I didn't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I end up leaving later, so anything like that, the more prepped you can be. And in an ideal world, I'd always have my bait done a few days before, but it's never been like that for me. I don't really care.
Does anyone else
how they're prepped?
Utter dramas with Burkos as well.
They're not
all the time.
Shorts out.
Something goes wrong with mine. I've got a dead one in the shed as well, and a live one.
You got the little button underneath. You have to press that all the time.
What I've found with mine is, over time, plate at the bottom of the Burko that obviously gets hot. When you're cooking particle, it'll get a certain amount of like carbonised, like
probably like lime scale.
Yeah, it's basically it's like basically burnt particle juice once that gets quite thick, I find it'll keep shorting. Then it keeps cutting off.
Yeah,
it must think it's hot, and you have to literally scrape all that off, and then it'll work.
I've had this. This was the last one I saw. It was definitely an extension lead.
I have found that if your Burko's nice and clean, it'll obviously constantly boil, and obviously it's got that sort of.
I've had it boil and turn off. It boils and then goes ding.
Yeah.
But it still works. And it just turns off.
It only goes to that temperature.
It just boils
and stops.
And then goes bang, and maybe that's why.
But that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's supposed to boil to a point, and then once it drops below a temperature, it reboils. It just keeps it at boiling point, doesn't it? But obviously they've got a reset button underneath or whatever, and I've found that when it gets, like, say, dirty, it'll keep just basically
shorting,
and you have to keep turning it on its side and pressing the reset
burning your hands with it.
But clean it. If it's clean, it generally doesn't happen. But once it gets quite thick, that layer, it just must.
Do you know what the other thing is? Good tip. This is my only good tip with Burko is switch it off before you reset the button, because you won't half whack you with an electric shock if you do it while it's still on.
Does it?
Yeah, I got walloped once for touching the bottom, because my old one had a plate that you had to unscrew to get to the little button.
All right.
And I touched one of the
That's probably
cables
why
and
you had to
absolutely walloped me.
unscrew the plate. Probably took morning you there.
Yeah.
See, mine isn't. You can turn mine on its side and I can just press it. Like I've never turned it off, and touch wood,
I think
not
like,
been
what
electrocuted.
you kind of was talking about earlier with the preps, when the period when I wasn't boiling my tigers, this was conscious.
Yeah.
The water they're in doesn't go. You know when it goes to like glue.
Yeah.
I hate them when they're like that. They do my head in, especially when I'm like you want to put a handful in.
Yeah.
Pick them up and I just get.
It's going a big clod.
And I'm like,
You can't throw them
I
out,
want
can you?
9,
Yeah.
or I want
You have to wash them.
Yeah.
You have to wash them in the
And they
lake.
go yeah.
In.
So that everyone's, I love tigers when they're all gooey. I don't. I hate it when that's my worst period of them.
Yeah.
When they're like that, I try to.
They then go more.
They surpass that and they go back to
acidy,
liquid.
sort of alcohol-y sort of.
Yeah, so you'll cook them. They'll be in the water. The water will be lovely. It's all lovely and sweet. They then from that stage they go really gooey to they're like a block.
Yeah.
And then from there they break down beyond that, and then they start to get that acidic tinge. That's when I prefer to use them, and or beyond that, like Tom said about having them for a long period of time. Like if some lakes I've been to, I've used a pure tiger nut approach, and I've just cooked multiple buckets up, and I just use them from till they're gone. So the longer they go, I'm not worried. My mate rang me this morning. He cooked a load of bait for Belgium. The tigers have gone all acidic, and he's binned them all. And I was like, mate, you should have kept them. But yeah, that sort of fermentation stage, whatever you want to call it, the gooey period, when you don't boil them, you don't get that. That doesn't happen. That goo stage doesn't happen. And I can only assume it's because you haven't boiled out of them all the sugars and stuff that cause that. Yeah. I could be wrong, but as long as a tiger is swollen to the correct size, it has taken on all the water it's gonna take on, and doesn't do that inside a carp, they're good to use. Safe. They don't have to be cooked. They have to be swollen. I always kind of looked at it like that. But I don't know, it's in my head, I don't know whether I prefer them. Like, I always think about it, like what's better?
Well,
you know?
it's interesting you say that, because although I've always cooked my tigers, and I'd advise most people to, well, I'd advise everyone to, because you don't want to, carp eating unprepared tigers. Have you ever eaten an uncooked tiger nut?
No.
They taste so much better than when they're cooked.
Handfuls.
Yeah, you can see why they were. And what Elliott's saying here, he's like, by just leaving them to soak, you are going to retain a lot of those natural sugars inside. You're not boiling it out. I mean, potentially they could be more effective, but I'm not going to tell everyone, I'd still advise cooking them. You don't want carp going belly up.
It's the same like hemp that splits. I don't really care about hemp if it splits or not. People do. It looks nicer. Yeah. But in my head, I'm like, I don't know if that's...
No, I think it's still cooked, isn't it?
Oh, of course it's still cooked.
Like, I'll be honest, if we've all done it. If I buy a sack of hemp that doesn't split,
you feel bad about it.
I'll go out my way to buy another sack of hemp that does, and then I'll just slowly bulk out the good hemp with a bad hemp throughout the course of the next few weeks.
Why?
Because it just doesn't look good.
Doesn't look the same. Yeah.
But if you with bad hemp that doesn't split though as well, I find a lot of the time if you squeeze the seeds, they're almost like dead inside. There's nothing to them.
Maybe maybe that is why. Like I say, I don't, but I've never been super sort of. I prefer my hemp if it splits. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know why that is.
What about size of seed? Because obviously we get years of different crops come from different parts of the world, and they're different sizes, aren't they? There's no
with
doubt
hemp,
about that.
I don't think it. No. If I get, as long as it splits, I don't care if it's big hemp or tiny hemp. Yeah. As long as it splits.
People love hemp that splits. Like I've been using the Blake's bait stuff, and I put it on my story. If anyone wants some good hemp, because I know people obsess over this.
It's nice and oily as well. It seems really oily.
It is very oily. That I would be more concerned about than if it was splitting.
But I think that's what Tom's saying, that them little husks that generate the oil, you presume, if they're all like withered up and that inside,
maybe
then maybe it's not the same.
Like, I very rarely, to be honest, have had hemp that doesn't split. Like
I did it to myself,
but it does exist.
Another like pitfall that I discovered was when I first tried the rock salt thing. If you put the salt in before, it won't split.
Don't put salt in your particles before you cook them, because it's definitely never going to split.
I'll tell you what I am interested in though with you guys is, because I do that now. Obviously, cook my hemp. and whatever else, then salt it, then goes in the bucket, and you'll get that sort of natural that it carries on fermenting presumably, because you get the bucket lids bulge, etc. And actually I find you get to a point after, maybe you guys have already introduced it at this point, but you get to a point after, I don't know, 5 or 6 days maybe, when it gets quite silky. It moves a bit more, there's a bit more viscous nature to the water, and I like it like that. And obviously the salt prevents it from going off as such. But I know people that are happy to leave it for months until you've got that blue crust on top, peel that off, and they reckon it's even better.
I mean, it's something I've never done, but like you said, some very good anglers out there that have done incredibly well will literally ferment their particles, you know, to a point where they're...
Are they salted when they're doing that though? I feel like a lot of the people I've known that have done it have salted them when they're kept for that long period. Like hemp, to me, tigers, you can leave them a long time. They don't smell rotten. Hemp, like
but
this is like certain particles. Like, but I remember I used to use Brazil nuts quite a lot, not in large quantities, but I used to use them quite a lot.
You used hook bait quite a lot, didn't you, as well?
Oh, mate, like if you want to know something that smelled bad when it's gone. Like we used to use quite large, like we'd get a bucket, say they're expensive, the Brazils, but we'd fill half a bucket, say a normal size bucket, we fill it like that high. So there's probably a couple of kilo in there. Like the smell of that I don't want to use stuff like that. And I have no doubt really they probably would still eat it. I've used boilies that are beyond sort of rotten, caught fish on them. But like tigers, not really got a time limit on when I'd use them. As long as they're still there, I'd still use them. Hemp, I'm a little bit more, I don't want to be using that beyond a couple of weeks. But then it smells.
Yeah, if you get a dot of that on your clothes, if it's been there months, it's bad news.
Oh, it's like bottom part. It's like baby sick in it. It's
putrid.
Like, it's horrible.
But I wonder if they'd eat it.
I bet
they would.
I bet they would.
I mean, I'm the same. Prior to me salting my particles, which I do now, I'd generally give it sort of a 2-week lifespan. You know, after that,
I would,
you get that sort of horrible sicky smell. And then personally, I didn't want to use it. But what we generally think is bad is not what the carp think. At the end of the day, they go around sucking up mud all day.
Yeah,
I wouldn't eat crayfish. Would you eat crayfish?
I've heard of many stories over the years of people having like rotten buckets of seed in their van that they've just gone and slung in the edge somewhere, and then they've turned up the following week and the carp are going mad on it.
Yeah.
You know, that they'll eat a lot more than but I do prefer it fresh. And then, like I say, in the last couple of years, I've started adding a lot more salt to it. And to be honest, I've used seed that's a month old and it still smells great. You know, the salt does make a massive difference in terms of.
I'll tell you one thing I've done last year. Like I was using the last few years, I've used a lot of hemp. I was boiling it for hours and hours and hours, like 4 or 5 hours in the Burko, and it was going really like. Traditionally, hemp is like water and a sort of rattly old seed. This was going really thick and like
soup.
Yeah, like thicker, stodgier. But probably I just boiled all the goodness out of it. But I was like, oh, this is a bit different. I'll just try that. I couldn't tell you if that's any, but it's so hard to judge when you're talking. Was my hemp better cooked on the day, used the next day? Was it better when I cooked it for 5 hours and used it a week like that? Yeah, how do you really judge that? You can't, I don't think. Sometimes you have good trips, sometimes you have bad trips. Like to be able to sort of decide if a fresh hemp is better than a 6-week-old hemp that stinks like shit, unless you're literally blank. It's not that easy to decide. And going back to the fact that I've used certain particles in so many different ways, that's why I don't really care. I'm kind of a bit of the opinion that as long as it's a tiger nut, as long as it's hemp and it isn't, like, they'll eat it, they'll like it. Yeah. And is there a right or wrong way? Probably not. Everyone does it. So many people do it in so many different ways. Like, by the sound of it, we don't do it the same way. I don't. If we put it on the same spot, would he have caught more than I would have caught? You don't know, do you? It's really hard to decide. But I don't think it goes off as quickly as a lot of people think. I think a lot of people are of the opinion that particle has got to be fresh.
Yeah.
And that's really not.
I mean, really, when you sort of think about it, carp are very often turned on by the by organic compounds that are breaking down, effectively rotting, like flesh that is breaking down in the water like a
Yep.
crate, like the organic acids that are released as a result, or the compounds, sorry, the aminos, etc. So, decomposition isn't necessarily as bad for a carp as perhaps we might think.
Surely the fermenting is what gives them their...
Yeah, the breakdown, that's your first breakdown is the cooking, isn't it?
Yeah. And then from then that fermentation, but like where is the cut-off point? You don't know. Like you say, some people use it that is, and it is months and months and months old. And what about if you it was a year old, or when does that? Where is the cut-off point between good and bad? I think it's just it's more how you apply it with a particle. As long as it isn't.
Have you guys got a bucket in your garage or shed that you don't go near though? Because there's always one or two in mine. Like I'm not quite sure.
I'll be honest. I've learned from that mistake many years ago. It's a lot easier to clean buckets there and then. Even down to once I've put my bait in out of buckets or used buckets, if you swill them out there and then, they're easy to keep clean. The minute you let that particle go all dry and crusty or rotten in a bucket, you might as well chuck the bucket
You've only
away.
got to wear them out as well. I've had a few, like you just wash them out, leave them in the garden.
I bet you've had a few.
Face up, let the rain get in them, and because then buckets will smell bad for a while. You just leave them in the garden for a couple of weeks, let the bucket come back
I
to
bet
life.
Jen was delighted with that.
Yeah, she loves it.
The thing is, as well, going down to talking about buckets being clean and whatever, if your buckets are slightly dirty, I think as well, and you put fresh particle in them, that dirty seed that's on that will speed up the
fermentation.
Exactly. If you've got a nice clean bucket, your particle will instantly remain fresher.
I don't wash my Burkos out. That's got like dried old rotten old particles.
I will always swill it at the end of cooking bait. Like I say, I've learnt from my mistakes over the years in that if you just leave it for it all to go dry and crusty on the inside of the boat, then you've got an headache trying to clean it.
How can they smell so bad?
Like I have it with mould in it. Like it'd be like mould in like an inch of liquid in the bottom. Come back, it's all blue and mouldy. I just pour my particle straight in and boil it. Like it doesn't. Yes, I'm saying. So
I'm definitely more fussy than that.
This is the difference. Like my caterpillar tigers I had the other week. So I had these tigers from, I don't know how old they were, but I moved house, put all my stuff into a barn in the middle of nowhere, my dad's little storage unit. Anyway, I went and got my tigers. They'd been there since probably last spring, so they're quite old. And they were full. They were full of little white grubs. Loads of them there was. And I was like, fucking hell. So I didn't have no tigers. I needed them to go fishing. So I looked at these tigers, and there was a lot of these little grubs in there. And I was like, oh, whatever. I just bunged them in the Burko and just cooked them. A lot of the tigers had little chewed bits out of them.
Holes in them and that, yeah.
So anyway, when I went fishing, I meant to take a crusher with me so I could blitz them.
Yeah.
Normally I just do them in my mouth.
Yeah.
But obviously,
you're not doing that, are you?
Yeah, it's done them. I had to do them. Yeah. So I rung him, right. So I get to the lake, open up the bucket, and there's just loads of these they're like these little white grubs.
They float?
Yeah, floating around in the water. And like, I was just like, oh, fuck it, I don't really care. They were they were cooked anyway. They weren't alive. They were like maggot skins, they looked like. But I wanted to put out like 20 odd spoms of tigers on each rod. And I was thinking, I ain't going to sit here and just pick these out of this.
Yeah.
So I was
blitzing them.
Just chewing them up. Yeah, tigers and caterpillar things all in one. Just like. But them tigers, to most people, were probably... I did actually blank, so maybe they were shit. But they were beyond... To look at in the bucket, they'd been eaten by these things. And
they look a bit like shriveled and real dusty.
They were dusty.
Yeah, dusty.
Cored out a little bit and that. But once you boiled them up, they looked like normal tigers. Tasted like normal tigers.
Yeah.
Even the caterpillars tasted like tigers.
The caterpillars probably made them a bit more attractive for the carp. Or maybe not, being as you blank.
The mould thing is interesting, and obviously we don't have the answers. But one thing that I would throw out there to people to think about, I don't think anyone's done anything with this kind of technology. But a friend of mine, Ben, shout out to Ben, I think listens to these things. He works in the fermentation sort of industry, so with all the yogurts and type stuff like that. You can use good bacteria to suppress the growth of the stuff that makes the pungent moldy stuff. So if you put the right bacteria into your hemp mix, they will suppress the growth, keep down the growth of the bad bacteria. So you'll never get that kind of savage putricity, that's not even a word, savage putridness of like the moldy stuff. I don't believe anyone's tried it, but it's almost like a way of preserving your mix without needing salt, and it keeps the bad bacteria away. So Yeah,
I remember you talking.
Maybe
to him.
someone.
He was
picks-
an interesting guy, wasn't he? You rang me, I think, after that conversation.
Yeah, it's
a
an
while
interesting. Yeah, like maybe someone picks that up, but it's like an organic way of preserving something, and you can certainly do it with particles. So, yeah, any bait companies out there, let me know, and I'll I'll put you in touch. Yeah, but the Tom uses party blend as well. But you're quite a straight hemp user, Al, aren't you?
I am now. So years ago, you call it's party blend what I call aniseed.
Yeah,
I call
pigeon
it
conditioner.
aniseed.
Yeah,
Like
pigeon
pinnaseed.
conditioner,
Yeah, pinnaseed, aniseed, pigeon conditioner. That's what I would always call it. Is it called red stripe or something? Isn't it?
Red band. Some
Red
people.
band,
It depends on the brand.
Red Stripe's beer, isn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, I
Red band. That's it.
Yeah.
generally
Either
I'd
way,
use
that's
the Buckton stuff, which is
the smells of
aniseed,
aniseed.
pigeon conditioner.
Yeah. So that was how the first particle I ever used was that, and I used it for years and years.
Easy to prepare, right?
So easy to prepare.
Boiling water over the top, and that's it. Leave it. Yeah.
Boil it. I've done it like that. I've also
well,
boiled
you can
it,
do it like that,
boiled
but
it, yeah.
I believe it is better
Boiled.
if it's
Goes
boiled.
really sticky and
Yeah, when it gets to that, you want it so the seeds are swell. I found it was its best when the seeds, obviously, you can just soak it, but when the seeds are literally splitting, you know, and it almost goes like a porridge,
Yeah.
you know, like almost.
Yeah.
I think like that is. I think it's really good. I really rate it.
With the aniseed, but you can get it
Yeah,
without.
I
can't you,
like with
think?
it. I always
Yeah.
used it with. The reason it was a conscious thing I did a few years ago now. Not that many years, maybe 2 or 3. I remember thinking to myself, people don't seem to use hemp anymore, and I know why it was. It's the price of hemp, because I remember this years ago when I used to buy my particle. You go in the shop. How much is a bag of pigeon conditioner? 12 or 18 quid or whatever it used to be. How much is this? How much is that? How much is hemp? 56 quid a bag or whatever.
Yeah.
And you think, fucking hell, I could buy 4 bags of. So I think over the years that bulk use of hemp has kind of just seemed. It ain't because the carp don't like it, because if you ask any carp angler what a carp's favourite particle is, I bet most of you then would say hemp. It just seems that it kind of went out of fashion a bit, whether that's, and I think it's probably largely down to the cost, because when you're bulk baiting, you are, to a degree, you want it to be cost efficient. That's one of the biggest advantages of it. But again, I go back to that thing, like what people aren't using. You know, it's like, okay, carp love hemp, probably their favourite particle, arguable, but
Do you think that maybe pellet had a downward pressure on hemp as well, in the sense that there was a heck of a lot more pellet usage? Hemp's more traditional, I think, and pellet was more fashionable.
Carp anglers I just think they don't seem to use hemp that often. So that was one of the reasons I was like, well, no one's going to use hemp. I don't see anyone using hemp anymore. I don't. And then it is expensive. And I remember, obviously, bait is a little bit more easily available to me now. I know a lot of people in the industry give me cheap bait. They might get, you know, like it's. So the cost of hemp doesn't affect me as much as it would have years ago when I was buying hemp. But the price thing, you know, you're paying. You know, in my opinion, it's the premium particle.
Yeah.
Therefore, what do you want to use? I want to use what I would see as the best one. So I think like that's carp love hemp.
Yes.
Like they do. It looks like snails. The lake I actually went on, before I'd fished there, it was massively full of natural food. And I remember years ago, a friend of mine, Rob, works here. He showed me a picture of this handful of snails he took out the weed, and I looked at that. This is probably 10 years ago, and I thought, when I go on that lake, I'm going to use hemp. And that's for largely what I did. You know, whether they really do they really look at it and think it looks like snails, but it does, and they love it, and it crunches like snails on a lake like that. And from then, I did really well on it. So simple, so different, and that sort of favour of pigeon conditioner just switched very quickly to hemp, and now that's what I tend to use. I think it's the best one. And
you'll happily fish a bigger hookbait over that, Al, wouldn't you? You're not like you're not going to start fishing like a couple of plastic grains of hemp glued to the shank of your hook, are you?
I have done a lot of particle fishing over the years, and I'm very much of the opinion these days, whatever bait I'm putting out, I fish bright hook baits all the time, pretty much. Like 90% of the year, I use the same hook bait. I use bright pink squid goo hook baits. That's what I use.
It seems it's like counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah.
You got that subtle bed of like dark hemp,
Put
and
a pink over it, mate. Yeah,
cherry on the top, sort of thing.
And a lot of the fishing last couple of years, a lot of edge fishing. I can go, like I can walk around and look at my spots, mate, and I can see my hook bait from 20 yards away. I can see my gravel spots that I'm fishing. I can see my black patch of hemp.
How often is there still hemp there? Once
Always, mate.
Yeah.
Always.
Right.
The only time I've ever seen any hemp, the only time I've seen the hemp gone, my hook bait was still there. So they clean me out.
Yeah.
And almost every other occasion, when I go back and look at my, after the bite, replace my rigs, there'd just be this wafted patch of hemp. And that's where they've come in, just nailed the, I would say pink pretty much straight away. But, you know, I talk to people about that. They're like, what, over hemp? You fish a...
I mean, you don't even fish 12 millers,
No,
do
mate,
you?
just a boilie, like a pink and that. It's really different. But to me, I'm just like, well, why would it not?
I want to get a quick bite.
They've only got to see the pink, and they're probably going to... That's my opinion now.
Because it's fair to say your normal way of fishing is like the odd night, and you do a night, and then you go...
Yeah, a lot of the time I've done that.
Yeah.
But...
So you want that bite. You're not looking to sort of get something going. You want a bite.
No, I don't want them feeding for any longer than... Depends on the areas as well. Like that lake, a lot of it for me was passing fish. So they would swim past in 2s and 3s. You're never getting... And the types of spots I'm fishing, really shallow water, under bushes. You ain't going to get 10 carp turn up. You get 2 turn up. They go. If there's nothing to hold them, they'll just swim straight past. So you get them 2 turn up. If you can... I want to catch one of them 2 as quick as possible, because I know that within half hour, another 2 are going to turn up.
Naive to the situation.
Yeah, they don't know what's happened. Rod's back out, and that is just like picking them off. But I've been down the road of, right, a little tiger nut tipped with yellow, or a chopped down boilie over particle, and I think the feeding time, and it's the same now. That's why I say it's the same whether I'm fishing over maggot, boilie, hemp, tigers, whatever. I put a pink out there.
It's something that Ollie said on a shoot we did with him, I think, similar kind of thing. Ollie Davis, that is. He uses a bright one over the top of seed, because then you've just got to make them make the choice. They either make the choice, take it or don't. If you use something more subtle, there's risk that they don't even get there, because they can't see it.
No, like I think, what do you use bait free off? Right, what do you use free bait for? Is to get fish to feed on a spot. Yeah. If I could fish a single hook bait everywhere all the time, I would. Yeah. Because what are they going to eat? The hook bait every time. The only reason I apply bait is to build confidence in a spot and to get them to drop down on a spot. Yeah. Once they drop down and feed on a spot, I don't want them to eat any bait other than a hook bait if they don't have to. The idea is that as quickly as I can, you get a pickup. Like that's the more they're eating free bait, as far as I'm concerned, that's no benefit to me. So if you have a hook bait that matches all of that bait, what good is it them just like if I can see my hook bait out of a tree over that bait, they can definitely see it. And I'm of the opinion now that I would rather, if a fish turns up, I want it to see my hook bait first. I want it to be the first thing it sees and the last thing it sees when it leaves. Yeah. Not just turn up, have a feed, never know where my hook bait was, never have a reason to pick up
just
my
make
hook
it
bait.
make that choice.
Yeah, it has to decide. Oh, sometimes, then maybe they'll just mug you off. But I think over the course of a year, if you've got something that is so blatant, I think you'll catch more like that. You might get ignored, but it does take a long time. I've seen it, mate, loads and loads of times. I'm watching. A big one has turned up. He turns up, he might have 10 or 15 mouthfuls. But if you've got 10 or 15 handfuls of bait down there, sometimes they just don't come close. And it's not they've ignored your rig. It's just that what is making them dive towards it. And I want them to turn up and my hook bait to be really, really obvious to them, because I think there's more likelihood that you're going to get a bite that way.
And Tom, because you said you've got a bit more time now, 4 or 5 days a week potentially, are you looking to build a spot, or are you looking to get a quick bite as well?
Yeah, I'll be honest, again, like I sort of mentioned before, really, now I've got the time. I generally turn up to a lake on a Monday morning, even on a Sunday. If Sunday's a good day to turn up on, because obviously a lot of people go on a Sunday, and generally midweekers won't turn up till a Monday. I've now got that advantage where I can go in swims, I can get exactly where I need to be. So yeah, I suppose I am looking for a quick bite more often. Whereas, like I say, previous, I had to create a situation that I could basically drop onto because it was in a quieter area of the lake. So it has no doubt changed my angling some degree, having more time.
And what about a quick bite within a situation of one morning, let's say? Are you like how are you trying to get them to notice your bait immediately, or do you want to create confidence?
Yeah. Well, again, to me, it depends on. It's quite interesting what Elliot was just saying about his pink hook bait approach all year round. That big pink boilie over the top of the bait. See, I'm still in that frame. In the spring, that's what I'd do. You know, I'd have a bright one these days on a spinner or whatever over the top of my bait. A couple of years ago, I was fishing on a lake in Reading where I could use a boat. And again, what Elliot was saying about how he'd bait his spots, he'd put his bright one over the top. I was using yellow ones on hinges or on spinners. And many times I've gone out there in the boat to replace my rod, and it almost looks like the spot has been untouched. The only thing that has gone is the hook bait. But personally, I think that's more of a spring thing. You know, the carp are swimming around at 100 miles an hour and they're prepared to snatch at these bright ones. Obviously, Elliot's results prove that it's not just a spring thing. But me personally, when we get to the summer, I still like an element of high attract, shall we say, to my hook bait, but I tone it down massively. Like my sort of over that that sort of particle approach, you know, heavy bait with particle. My sort of winning hook bait over the last 10 years has been a single balanced tiger nut, often quite a small one, tipped with a tiny bit of yellow. You know, just enough to sort of catch the fish's eye. That was obviously I don't put any corn in my mix generally. But yeah, just enough to catch the fish's eye, but it's still a very subtle hook bait. I think if they're on a spot mowing down a lot of seed, a lot of hemp, I think if that smaller hook bait is an edge, you know, when they've been caught potentially all spring on these bright ones, they might be a bit more wary in the summer. But like, it's obviously each to their own, because that's my sort of go-to. Whereas Elliot's saying here that, you know, he'll use big bright pink ones, and that works as well. I think the
pop-up thing is a big difference as well. Like a lot of people assume if I say I'm putting a bright pink over, I'm using a pop-up.
Yeah,
I'm not, and I wouldn't.
I've also seen you.
I have done.
No. I was going to say there was a sliver of yellow. That was a very regular thing for you.
Like my standard for, mate, I couldn't even tell you when. At least 10 years, I would say, was. If I was fishing boilies and I was fishing on a deck, I'd have a slivery 6mm yellow foam, always, without fail. If I was fishing with tigers, always slivery. But there came a time and I thought, what am I trying to do with that sliver of yellow? I'm trying to, amongst all the other feed, get them to see my hook bait. And then I was like, well, I had so much faith in those pinks that I use. I thought, do you know what? Why not guarantee they're going to see my hook bait? And that's the road I now go down. And it
is an interesting theory, and it obviously works.
And if you watch underwater, like I've done a few, and I've seen it even out the trees. I've seen it in the edge. When they go, when a carp chooses to take that hook bait rather than picks it up by accident while it's just feeding, like if they see something and they want it, like the difference in how they engulf that compared to kind of an accidental. And you know, we record that perfectly on the Cleveland Mere version of our underwater, and you can see it going all the way. It has that lineage going all the way back to the Korda underwaters on St John's, doesn't it? That pink the
thing.
Turning of the head.
Yeah,
you're like, you see them, clock it, you watch them. I've seen carp out the trees swimming along, and I've seen them turn and then beeline all the way down to like 10 yards in clear water to a bright pink pop-up over, like and bang, like but and it's the same on a spot. Like I think just if you can, I want them to always see me. But you may get one chance in a year. This is how I kind of look at it now. Like I may get one opportunity that year where the carp I want to catch comes onto my spot, and if there's loads of bait there, that's fine. But the chances of say it's only there for 10 minutes. If you've got a load of bait out and your hook bait matches it all, what are the realistic chances? Let's say it has 10 mouthfuls of getting a pickup off of it. I think if there's a bait down there that it can see for every second it's on, if it has 10 mouthfuls, I just feel like my chance of it picking me up is probably higher. and that's kind of just
Yeah.
that's how I look at it now.
Ethically, should we use particles? Like, there's no doubt that hemp is a very good food source. Tiger nuts are a human grade sort of food as well. I think it's fairly clear that carp don't have the machinery in their gut to get the best out of those food sources.
I've this has been something I've spoke, like, I use tigers in massive quantities at times, and people are like, oh, you can't do that. And if a lake is overstocked to the point, this is what for me defines it. If a lake is overstocked to the point where they rely on eating anglers' food to survive and sustain a healthy life, and in a lot of cases that is true, because there's a lot of lakes now that are overstocked or heavily stocked beyond what I would class as kind of a healthy number. They rely on anglers' bait to survive well.
Yes.
In those instances, if everyone is using nuts or if everyone is using particle, maybe they're not going to live a particularly healthy life, because they will deplete what is available to them naturally, and they are then relying on anglers' bait. So what does their diet consist of? On a normal lake with a normal stock, they don't need our food. They can survive. If all the anglers disappeared tomorrow, they would live happily ever after with no bait whatsoever. So I think to suggest that by using particles all the time and stuff like that, we're doing them a disservice because they can't get they're not eating what they need to eat. Like, they don't need anglers' bait to survive. So
in your opinion, it's a question for the individual. What do you think your lake is capable of?
Yeah.
What do you think you should use?
If you took all the anglers away tomorrow, what would happen to that lake? Has it got so many carp in it that without anglers' bait, they are or would be unable to get the natural food they need because there's too many mouths for what the lake has to offer? In those cases, no, I think a boilie and a pellet rule makes total sense because they are relying on that food to live. But on a lot of lakes,
would you, if you had a lake, Al, what do you?
I would allow people to use any. I wouldn't ban anything.
It all depends on the stock of the lake. You know, a lot of the lakes we're talking about are generally low stocked, natural lakes where the lake itself can sustain those carp without the need. You know, we're just substituting their diet with something else.
Bonus
they can
food
take
to
it.
me.
Yeah, they can take it
food.
or leave it.
They're not going to eat just tigers to the point they die when there's all that natural food available to keep them alive.
And obviously stuff like wheat is used regularly by fish farmers.
Yeah, and maize. You know, maize is another good one.
Like a healthy lake shouldn't matter if there's an angler fishing it or not. And 90% of lakes I've ever fished, if you stripped all the anglers away tomorrow and they never saw a pellet, a boilie, a tiger or whatever again, you come back in 10 years, the carp will still be there happy, healthy and happy. There are some lakes though where I think the angler's bait is really important.
I wonder with those, Al, whether we just keep their weights high because of that, and
it's
actually
bonus
they
food.
Probably just shrink.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I've seen it on my local park lake is a great example. You know, it's not overstocked. There's probably 100 odd fish in there in about 12, 13 acres. But the last few years, the carp's weights have really suffered on there. And I think that's generally the way people are fishing it. A few years ago, there was a lot of keen anglers on there. Everyone was putting out buckets of bait. There was a lot of boilie going in there. Over the last few years, a lot of the anglers that I know that were using boilies, etc., have dropped off. You know, they've got other tickets or whatever. And the lads that are on there now, people are very easily influenced. And you know, one of the lads who's doing particularly well on there and has done for the last few years, he just uses tiger nuts over pigeon conditioner. It's not what he's using. It's he knows the lake very well. He's baiting areas. He's getting in the right places at the right time. But a lot of the other anglers have then looked at what he's doing, and a lot of them are using bait boats. They're just sending a handful of particle out to the middle with a tiger nut, tiger nut hook bait, and the carp have suffered. You know, they've all dropped weight. They don't look their best because that is a lake where they've sort of grown up relying on people's bait. And all of a sudden the baiting's changed and everybody's putting out just a handful of seed with a nut over the top, and the carp aren't benefiting it. I mean, it catches them. When I particle fish, I generally always put a certain amount of boilie in, whether it be whole or broken or whatever. But yeah, it does definitely depend on the lake you're fishing, and I cannot blame these sort of heavier stock lakes, shall we say, often having boilie and pellet rules because there is no doubt that that is going to only benefit the fish, their weights, their health in the long term.
And
Like-
is that sorry? Is that something, Tom, that you think is important for you as an angler to be giving something back in terms of the bait that you are giving them?
Well, yeah, I suppose, you know, at the end of the day, we want to catch them, but you want to maintain their health and you want them looking the best. And at the end of the day, if you're giving them boiling pellets, you're still going to catch them. You know, in the summer months, they just want to eat. The reason we're using particles is there's no denying carp like particles. They're relatively cheap in comparison to boilies. They clean spots, but so do pellets. You can use anything to your advantage. It's just, you know, where you put it. And at the end of the day, you know, we want the carp to be the best they can. We want them to look the best. You want them to last as long as they can. You want them to have the best quality of life. And anything that's going to, you know, we all want to catch them, don't we, at the end of the day? But at the same time, we don't want them to, we don't want what we're doing to.
No, I don't believe any of us want,
affect-
absolutely, to be at their detriment.
yeah,
doing
yeah.
it. No.
I think the pellet thing as well. Like I remember talking to, in fact, I won't name him in case I quote him wrong, but there's different types of pellet, and he basically compared. So say on a fish, what an angler would use, is a high oil,
high protein, isn't it? Yeah.
pellet. Yeah. What they don't feed them on a farm, do they? They use those pale looking ones. You got traditional dark black looking pellet.
Yeah.
And then you got the pale
think
orangey sort of, right? Now I asked when I watched that guy feeding this lake, and he knows his stuff. I was like, why? What are they? They look like shit trap pellets. They look like, I wouldn't want to use them.
Basically,
they look like dust bread. They didn't look. And he was like, this is what you'd class as a sustainable diet for a carp. The pellet that he was like, compare it to a McDonald's or a Sunday roast or whatever. And he was like, a traditional pellet that an angler would use isn't necessarily good for a carp. Yes, it makes them fat, because they're eating a lot of fat. But these pellets are lower in oil, but as a diet, they're way better for them. So even on a lake with your trout with a pellet only rule, from what he's saying, I don't necessarily think the pellet that they're getting fed is that good for them. It might make them fat.
Time of year as well.
Yeah.
During the very warmest
is a fat
months.
carp a good healthy carp? I don't know. Is just because it's really up in weight and fat, does that make it healthy? I don't know the ins and outs of that. But from what he was saying, he was like, no, that we would never feed our fish that pellet day in, day out. But you get a guy who puts a pellet only rule on his lake, and he'll happily have every single angler that turns up use those kind of pellets. Well, talk to someone who knows what they're on about. That's not a good thing. So you may
Depends on the pellet, doesn't it? I imagine if you've got pellet only rule, you're looking at, like you say, maybe those slightly lower oil ones.
But that's not the rule. It's pellet only, right. And people don't buy them.
Can be, can't it? I mean, I love those little. Personally, my mix always has pellet in.
Pellet's great.
I the high oil pellet. I don't put loads in. Do you know, a couple of handfuls into a bucket, a normal size, like
plenty.
You know, the bucket we all I think that's 10 litres or something more. I forget.
10 litres like the average size
average bucket.
Yeah.
So I put a couple of handfuls of high oil pellets in those, and quite often you get all the oil come to the top as well. But I love how they soak up the juices. They feel like it's a little bit more protein for them. It's a little bit of different level of
mixing my stuff anymore. I don't like mixing boilie pellet particle in a bucket together. I add it
I
as it
generally
goes
do
out.
it as I go. Yeah.
Otherwise, it'll sort of.
I'm using it straight away. Like I'm using it that night,
putting it in and out.
or the next day or something. You know. I could understand why you wouldn't necessarily mix it if you were there for 4 or 5 days. You want to.
Yeah, especially again. I know I'm going a bit off subject here, but if you're putting salt in your particle, and you got tiger nuts, and you mix the two together and leave them for more than 8 to 12 hours. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. You don't really use salt, do you? But
I use it, but not in.
Your tiger nuts will basically shrivel up like little prunes. The salt draws the moisture out of the tiger nuts.
Again, I think that's something I found. I make all the mistakes. I'm sure Dan Wildball told me that. It's like. In fact, I've done it with boilies as well. I don't know if you ever. I do dust my boilies with a fine. Salt. But if you leave that too long, or you don't have enough liquid, or the liquids you put in are salty, they go rock hard, mate. Really hard. I don't want them like that. But
I always put liquid on the boilies and then a coating of salt. So basically, the liquid you're putting on, the salt will actually help to draw that liquid
Yes.
into the bait and
Unless-
retain a bit of moisture.
Unless it's a really salty liquid, which is what I used. they went like bullet. So it wasn't it wasn't the one.
But yeah, don't put your tiger nuts in salty particle because you will ruin the tigers. Always keep them separate. I always keep my boilies separate, and then as the mix is going to go out that evening or whatever, I'll make up the mix that I'm going to put out there and then, i.e. put some seed in the bucket, a few boilies, a few nuts, spom it out there and then.
I mean, I quite like the boilies to have gone to complete mush almost, like really soft, like draw it all in. But it's by the by. You guys are here to talk about the prep, aren't you? So
It's all personal preference and how we've done well in the past, I suppose. Isn't it?
I think the mushy boilies is good on a busy lake.
Can't it? I mean, your boilie's good enough already, isn't it? But
I used them years ago. I used to I didn't even use the particle.
when Christchurch got, when Lloyd was on there and
mushy
mush in the boilies.
I mean, I just remember Scott. There was obviously other anglers doing it, but the mush took it apart, didn't it? In a little tiny whittled down bait.
But I fished like a boilie dominated water, and I wanted to use boilies. Normally in a boilie dominated water, I didn't.
Yeah.
This was quite a few years ago. I'd really got into chod fishing, hinge fishing, and looking beyond the boilies. I'd been fishing particle and stuff for a long time. I just got into my boilie fishing, and that's what I wanted to use. And everyone put boilie in. It wasn't a massive lake. And because I loved my particle fishing so much, I started to cook the particle, take the juice. I have mentioned this before. Take the particle juice out, freeze the particle, keep the juice, soak the boilies in the juice until the boilies were like mush. And that you're applying them into the lake. Not only are they packed with that attraction, but that soft, I've no doubt that soft texture signals bait that's been out there for a while. I don't necessarily believe that they prefer eating it because it's soft. I can't see that being true.
The signal, it just says safe to them.
It's what it signifies, on a lake where people are turning up day in, day out, putting fresh boilies in that are always of the same texture, always of the same, again, being different.
Yeah. I haven't seen you do it for a while, though, Al.
No, I've never done it since. Never done it on a lake since. I haven't done it since. But that lake, I wanted to use boilies. It was boilied, but how can you do it differently? So if I fished a lake where there was a boilie and pellet only rule, that would be the first thing I did. That would be my first approach.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I've never fished a lake like that. I wouldn't really want to fish a lake like that with that rule, to be fair.
How much can they eat in summer? We're talking about summer here. This is when
loads.
Yeah, this is when the water's at its highest, the temperature is highest. They're reliant on that for their metabolism. Therefore, stands to reason that this is their peak troughing season, right? They want to recover what they've lost during spawning. None of us are scientists, so I'm not going to ask you about salts, etc., things that they perhaps are seeking after spawning. We've all heard those things. I don't know the truth of it. There are examples in fishing of lads, I mean, I won't name them just in case I'm doing them a disservice, but I can think of 2 or 3 who are renowned for utterly filling it in with particle, and fishing over it as well.
I looked at weirdly. I was looking at George Benos's Instagram page the other day, and it's one of my favourite shots in fishing ever. You got your classic carp shots or whatever, but this for me is right up there for me with one of the
doing it
best. And I think in years to come, maybe. People may look back at that and go, that. But he's got a picture of a big boat filled with particle. Yeah. So a boat, the big as this table probably, if not bigger, filled to the brim. He's basically used a boat as a bait bucket, and he's towing one boat out by another boat, and then he's emptying the boat worth of particle onto a spot. And I'd never read the caption, but I did read it, and it said, one of these every week for 4 weeks during the closed season period led to the most fruitful period of my fishing that I've ever had or whatever. And Benos is a known big baiter. Yeah. But that shot, that's a lot of bait. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of big carp in there. Yeah. And he done one of them a week and they smashed it.
So does more mean more?
I don't know.
Why don't you do it? If you're both in a position to do that.
If no one was there to fish over it, and you could give it that
super hit.
I don't.
Again, though, it all boils down to right place, right time. Because if everyone just starts rocking up to a bait and putting a boat's worth of bait on a spot, it's not going to end well.
No.
But if you are in a position where you've got a good area, you know the carp are visiting it, it's post spawning where they're going to be feeding, you know, they can eat a lot of bait.
Yeah.
But again, it's got to be in the right place at the right time. I don't know exactly when to say that is. You sort of, you know yourself, don't you? And it's, you know, I've done well off giving them.
I think post spawning is the.
Here we go. Here we go.
Is that the right one?
That is the
There
one.
you go. Yeah.
That is nuts, isn't it?
Yeah. Here you go. Look,
It's actually maize, Toad.
one of these a week. One of these a
good
week
one, that.
for the 4 weeks it's closed. Actually dug the spot out, ended up good 2 foot deeper. So that's a lot. That's a lot of bait. He should have got a lid for it, and he could have. But yeah, that's
Or just like a
a
plug
boat
in the
lid.
bottom or something. I mean, how do you even put that out? Is spade?
I
Go
guess you had
shovel.
a spade,
shovel.
yeah. Shoveling it off.
But that's a great shot. Like that's a great shot. You know,
And that's an example of outside the box, isn't
this
it?
is an example of a guy who knows how to
Yeah.
apply bait, how much he can
I
get
can
away
actually-
with, and outside the box.
I can
yeah.
actually remember when that came up on Facebook. I think he got quite a bit of stick over
would've
that.
done, yeah.
You know,
For
from
no
people
reason.
being like, "Oh, you feeling?" But you know, George isn't saft. He knew the lake was shut for spawning. He was putting it in the right place. The carp needed it. That's what, you know. Going back to what I said before, it's right place, right time, right venue. You know, you wouldn't do that every single week.
all year round. No.
And if everybody was doing that as well, it wouldn't be such an edge. But yeah, it's a massive edge if done in the right place.
What do you
at the
think
right
he
time.
was fishing over? How much would you know, once you've been doing that, what are you then prepared to fish over?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll be honest. Generally, when I've baited heavy in the past, I've turned up on a Friday and then fished for a bite as such. But I mean, Englefield / Burfield is probably two good examples, because Burfield, I would generally, the swims I was fishing and the fish I was fishing for, i.e. the Burfield Common, which wasn't a really known bait fish, I'd bait these spots heavy when I'd leave, but then I'd just fish for a bite for the days I was there and then bait it heavy before I left again. Whereas Englefield, those big ones in Englefield, the baby black, the lungfish, the leather, they were all known bait fish. So there I would fish over more bait. You know, I'd happily come back.
So let's have some quantities.
So I'd bait with anywhere between 2 to 3 buckets. And when I say buckets, I'm talking 17-litre buckets when I leave. Anywhere between 2 to 3, depending on how well the spot was going at the time. But when I'd come back, I'd probably put 10 kilos out. And
that's a lot.
That's still a lot. Yeah, you know, 10 kilos.
Actually, no,
over
it sounds a lot, but particle-wise,
It's
that
not,
isn't,
though.
is it?
It's not a lot.
If you're
yeah,
spawning
it's like-
10 kilos out into the pond,
Go and look at it.
at range,
Yeah.
putting 3 rods over it. This was over a relatively large area. I was putting 10 kilos out, like I say, 3 rods on it. If you went, that's not actually a lot, you know. And I say most of that would be particle. There'd be a few handfuls of tigers in there and a couple of kilos of boilies. It's not a lot.
So do you think? So my first reaction then was one of like, that's a lot, and then immediately thought, hang on a minute,
Actually, it's not.
It's not even a bucket. Do you think there's an element of like, we could recalibrate what we think about is a lot of bait as a carp angler? Because 10
That
key of
picture
boilies
proves
even,
it, doesn't it?
10
Like
key of
that.
boilies even, you try and go out there and find them.
Yeah, yeah,
Unless
to-
you've spombed them all around
Yeah.
a marker float, you're not going to be able to find them, are you?
I did it
no.
years ago. Put a float out. I put a 10 kilo boilie out. I'd never done that ever. Put 10 kilo boilie out. Well, maybe I put 5. It was 5 or 10, and I catapulted it to a marker float 40 yards on this gravel bar, and I thought I'm going to go out in the boat and look at it. And I wasn't allowed out in the boat,
Yeah.
but I was this kind of like excited by what I'd done. I thought, do you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to get the boat. I'm going to nip out there. I'm going to look at it. And I went out there and I'm looking over the bar, and I was like, where the fuck's all my bait got? It took me a few minutes to realise that was my 5. I thought I was going to see like a 5 kilo bag, cut the bottom of it open, imagine it on the floor here. That's what I thought it would look like. Mate, I think I went back and put another 5 key out, because that's what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to achieve a carpet of boilies.
Striking.
Yeah. But mate, I was like drifting around in the boat trying to find where it had all landed, and I was like, well, it's a float at 40 yards. Like, this is it. Like, a lot of bait in a bucket, they don't look the same out in the lake, especially when you start spomming it and it's spreading. And I think you can get away with a lot more than most people think. And going back to one of the reasons I use these bright hook baits all the time now, they're like, many years ago when I first got into particle fishing, I used to use big quantities. So I used to have this big white bucket. It was well more than 17 litres.
I know
do you remember
one.
the bucket?
Yeah,
You probably saw me with it.
Quite
I had
tall.
it. It was
I think
like...
They're like 25 litre.
Yeah.
Things, big.
Right.
Didn't you put a whole one out of Manor on linear
Manor,
ones? Yeah. It took half a day.
It took ages, but
Yeah.
that was my go-to. So
Yeah.
when I was a kid, I was like 16. We'd been fishing this lake, catching nothing on boilies. It was nut dominated at the time. They were banned, and I thought, I'm going to use particle there. We were going to go down to like a 10-day session or something, and we went to go there. I rang my mate, and he'd gone to a different lake, and I was like, fuck's sake, why have you gone there? I didn't want to go there. So anyway, I went down there, a little bit of the ump, because I didn't really want to go there, and I just put this whole bucket out. So I probably put 20 key of pigeon conditioner out, and I caught 12 that first night. There's 120 carp in the lake, and then from then on, every night, that's what we did. Back and forth to the lake, filled a bucket up. Then he started doing it, and between us, mate, we were filling it. Well, we were putting 20 odd key straight out with a little spod. It took take us hours, and that kind of became that was how I fished particle for a while. I don't do that as often now, and I certainly stopped doing that when I became of the opinion that actually it can take longer to get a bite. One of the main reasons I now use the brights is because I think I can put, whether I put a kilo out or 100 kilo out, I've never put 100 out, this is just
like theoretical.
I always bait tight now, generally. I want my spods the same, bang, bang, bang. But whether I put a kilo out or 100 kilo out, when they turn up, that hook bait is still as visible. So I now bait not to top up, something I've consciously done in recent years, especially on smaller, more pressured lakes. If you use a hook bait where I believe they're eating a lot more bait before you get a pickup, there is more need to top back up. I don't want to have to top back up. The thought of spomming, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to put my bait out once and then not have to put more bait out until the next day. So by using a hook bait that I feel is more attractive, whether that's being soaked in goo or being bright, you can put more bait out but still have just as good a chance of getting bites. Therefore, you don't need to disturb the swim any more than just with one cast. And I think you can catch more carp because of that, because casting is bad. I would say on pretty much any lake, especially when you've got fish visiting it. The last thing you want to do, really, I think, is put 4 more spoms out. You only do that because you want to top up your bait.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of we're going to drag this back round to the summer theme, and maybe give people, before we wrap up, give people a kind of a bit of a guide, a bit some take home about, we've discussed where you think bait should be applied, and that's very much where the fish tell you. Let's presume that not everyone is as fortunate or as observant or has the ability to be at the lake enough. Let's talk a bit about depths. Let's talk a bit about weed beds. Let's talk raking. Like, what kind of stuff are you looking for where perhaps you haven't had the sightings that you would like to have had? Is there a depth in high summer that you'd be happy baiting in?
I mean, it's a tough. Yeah, you don't want it too shallow, obviously, that birds are going to get it. I mean, I find 7 to 9 foot is a good consistent. I think if you had any depth to choose from to fish throughout the whole year, on any 7 to 9 foot's a good happy medium.
Yeah.
But again, in the summer, I've known them to start hitting the deeper areas again. But yeah, usually 7 to 9 foot. Near weed beds as well is obviously a massive winner. Like if you want areas that are going to have some degree of traffic. Again, I'm sort of talking about the lower stock lakes here. I'm guessing on heavier stock lakes, most of the lake's going to have some degree of traffic. But on the lower stock, bigger lakes, certain areas of the lake might not have any fish traffic for weeks and weeks on end. But yeah, if you can find a nice depth, 7 to 9 foot, somewhere not too deep, not too shallow, near heavy weed or near snags or somewhere that the carp are likely to visit frequently, those are always going to be more favourable areas, shall we say. Like you say, not everyone's got the advantage of being there all the time, but observation is key. Whatever, even if you've got minimal time, the more you can look, the more the carp will tell you. And the more the carp tell you, the better your chances are going to be once you put that bait in.
What about middle of the pond, Tom? I know that at times in the last couple of years, I've seen you do it, you know, fishing right in the middle of the sea.
Middle of the pond is obviously always a good area to go to. If you've turned up at a lake, obviously I've turned up, you know, my fishing's changed a bit the last few years. I've turned up at some lakes that, you know, usually where I used to just fish one venue. I'd fish there consistently. I'd be there every week. I sort of knew where the carp were likely to go. I knew their habits. I knew all them going to be in there in the mornings. They might be over there in the afternoons. Wind's blowing that way. They're going to be down there or whatever. But if you're turning up to a venue that you don't potentially know a lot about, or what they're doing or what their habits are, middle of the pond is always a good bet, because you're never going to, whether they're down one end or down the other end, you're always going to have some degree of traffic in the middle, especially if it's relatively long range. They often probably don't get fished out there that often, so it's sort of a bit of a safe zone. Yeah, you're never going to be far wrong in the middle of the pond. That's the way I see it.
I kind of have this image of you fishing 31 wraps, Tom, with a overseed. I think it was shallow.
Shallow pit. That's a good example. You know, for as bad as it is, I've done a fair bit on shallow over the last couple of years. Never caught any of the real big uns, but I've caught quite a few out of there. And my fishing on there has become quite lazy in a sense. When I do go there, I've tried it, you know, I chase them around. I see them here, I see them there. Often I'm there in the week. There might be only myself and one or two others on. And like, I'll see them in one swim. I'll go there, I'll fish for them. The next morning they're over there. You're chasing your tail. You know, on a weekend, the lake's busy and the fish are naturally going to end up on someone. But when I was there in the week and it was quiet, like I say, I'd end up chasing my tail. I was just pushing them around. So in the end, I just fish in this one swim. I'm still doing it to this day because I still dabble on there. I just stick them wherever I saw carp. I just go in the same swim, stick them out in the middle of the pond. I knew that sort of 31 wraps range was a lot further than a lot of the lads on there could comfortably fish. I go in there. I've got 2, 3, maybe 4 nights ahead of me. And as lazy as it sounds, you know, one way you could look at it as bad angling and the other way you could look at it as good angling. I don't know, but I knew.
remember you saying to me at the time, I feel a bit bad. Whenever I come here, I just go in this same swim. You're like,
because I know over the course. I know over the course of the duration of our trip, if I go there, stick them long in the middle, whether I have to wait 24 hours, 48 hours or whatever, eventually they're going to come across the bait and I'd usually end up catching a couple. You know. You can never go far wrong in the middle as long as you got the time.
I think I interrupted you as well, and hopefully people will forgive that. That we didn't quite get to I asked you about quantities. You started talking about Englefield, and I think there was a Burford example that I think we should just revisit quickly. So, Engie, you were talking about putting a 10 key bait out, weren't you? We went off on the tangent, but 10 key on Engie to fish over. Yeah.
So Engie, as I say, the fish in there were known bait fish. The big uns, especially the A team, were all renowned for coming out over big hits of bait. I'd seen it happen many times before, so I sort of adapted my baiting approach and my fishing to suit those carp. Whereas Burfield, you know, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of carp, especially the sort of stockies in Burfield. You will catch them over big hits of bait, and I did catch carp from Burfield over big hits of bait. But towards the end of my fishing on Burfield, I definitely again sort of refined my fishing to suit the carp that I wanted to catch, which is obviously the Burfield Common, which if you look back at all its captures, it has never been caught over big quantities of bait. I still wanted to bait those spots because I still wanted to train them into feeding on those areas. But when I actually came back to fish, I would generally just you could use a bait boat on Burfield, which made this type of fishing more doable, but I'd literally just put my rig, you know, my tiger nut rig in the boat, a handful of seed, little bit of boilie crumb, few tigers, and I'd just bait boat those out, drop them on my pre-baited areas. So I was sort of fishing for a bite over an area which I'd sort of trained them to feed. I'd still imagine that when I was putting decent bits of bait, we don't know, you know, we don't know what's going on out there. We haven't always got underwater cameras in the swim. But I'd imagine that common probably fed on our baited spots quite often, but it maybe would hang away from the pack of more greedy, competitive fish. It would sit off to the side, picking bits off. Like I say, by just fishing for that bite, I felt like I had more chance of hooking that fish. And what's interesting is when I actually caught the common, after, years of baiting on many different areas of the lake, many different spots, when I actually caught the common from speedboat, the week before I caught it, I'd been catching lots of tench on the rod that I ended up catching it on. This had actually happened the year before in that swim as well. You get to sort of the end of June, start of July, and the tench, for whatever reason, would become an absolute nightmare. Whatever you put on the end, you were catching tench. There was no way around them. And I'd had that many tench on that rod. The right-hand rod, which was in slightly deeper water, wasn't so much of an issue. So the week before I caught it, I actually decided to only bait the right-hand spot, and the left-hand spot, even though I'd been baiting it weeks and weeks, like consistently running up to this, the tench was such a pain, I decided not to bait that spot. Solely, the sole thought being that I thought, all I'm doing here is feeding tench, and if I rebait, I'm going to come back the following week and have the same again. I'm just going to be rod out there, tench. So I actually didn't bait that spot, came back the following week, put a handful of bait onto an area that, although it hadn't seen bait the week before, it had consistently seen bait for months prior to that. Years in fact, even though I didn't bait them in the winter when the carp just weren't in that area, and caught it. My theory was, I don't know, but my theory on that capture is that carp had come into that area many times before. It had seen bait there, it probably fed on it, but it wasn't a competitive feeder like the others, so catching it over a big bed of, I don't know, but whatever it happened, I caught it over a very small amount of bait over an area that had been baited for a long period of time, but then I'd basically cut the baiting off, and I just had a single nut over a very tiny bit of a bait there. So it's all theory, we don't know, but I felt like that was, I'd refined my tactics and my baiting when fishing to catch that carp, unintentionally, I suppose. But yeah, interesting.
And Elle, what about you? When you found these little tiny spots in the weed, how much are you giving them in a week pre-bait, and what are you fishing over?
I generally 99% of the time when I fish, I put 11 spods out. If I put 2 rods out, I put 22 out. Accurate. So if one goes off, I don't count it. So yeah, I put 11 accurate spods. If there's one rod, medium Nash dot spod, so like a medium spod.
Is that about a kilo of bait, do you think?
I don't actually know. Know. That I just know 11 if there's one rod, 22 if there's 2 rods. Sometimes, there's always the exceptions. Sometimes I've gone, fuck it, I'll put 60 spods out. But my general approach is that. In terms of baiting, it can. It's one of those things you never really know until you're in the moment what you feel like it needs. The most I've ever put out was when I fished on the Met, and I was putting out like 4 or 5 big buckets, barrowing it round and spodding it out. But sometimes I've gone down and I'll bait with 11 spods, 20 spods. Normally, if I'm baiting, I take a bucket with me, and I generally have 2 spots as well. It's not that often I just have 1. So normally I take a bucket of bait, but that's more regular baiting. And again, it really does vary, but I'd always bait with more than I fish.
Do you think you can even overbait after what we discussed about how much bait is actually going into the lake?
I think you can, but not
Depends
as easily
what other people are doing, I suppose.
Not as easily as you think. Right. I think a massive thing for me, and I don't know if other people have the opinion, is the birds. I'm not just baiting for carp. I think bird life diving on a spot is such a big draw to carp. I really do. I genuinely believe that. I want birds and carp and anything really. I would just want that spot to be active. Like diving birds on a carp lake, to me, especially diving birds that don't get spooked off. 99% of carp anglers, if they've got birds diving over their bait, will spook them off. So I think enough bait to ensure that I want that bait to pretty much run out the day I get there. So if we turn back up to the lake, there's still birds diving, some people are like, that's bad. But it may not be. There may just be scraps left. You never know without going to look. Having a boat, they make a big... but I think if you're catching carp, you've got no fear of if you're turning up, there's birds diving, you're not catching anything, then I would start to think, hang on a minute. But I think as long as you're catching carp off the spot, you've got no fear of over bait, like because they won't leave. Carp won't leave bait. I don't think they won't. Like they're going to eat it till it's gone, or you've spooked them off. Like so.
Yeah. And don't be beaten. Don't be beat. I've done the same, mate. I've walked up to the swim and been immediately disheartened and want to go home because of birds.
Yeah.
But then equally,
funny enough, we were talking about this the other day, weren't we? You know, I've had that multiple times. Turned up to a lake on a Thursday after work, having baited a spot, seen birds diving, thinking, "Oh God, how much bait's still out there?" Put the rods out and caught 4 that night. You know, so don't be put off by the.
I think it's a big safety beacon. Again, a lot of my fishing is small lakes.
Yeah.
But like to me, it's just I've seen it. Birds come over people. The only time I generally see birds diving on bait is when the angler ain't there. So, small lake, carp. What does that mean? You know, 9 times out of 10, there's probably bait there, not an angler there. What does that mean to a carp? They're not stupid. They do. So yeah, if you know enough bait to keep birds and carp visiting regularly enough when you arrive and fish. That's the aim of the game.
There's never going to be a written rule of a set amount of bait to put in at any time. You've just got to you read it by the situation, what's happening. You know, if you've caught a few and the conditions look really good, give them a bit more.
How often can you get there? Like the Met, the Met was a bit of a trek for me. It's not the sort of place, like it's different because when it's just around the corner, I could go there every day if I really wanted to. When it's further away, you're like, right, I want to put bait in to last 4 days here. Whereas some lakes, I'm like, right, I want bait to last me 24 hours because I'm going to go back tomorrow and put a bit more in. So it's all how far away is it? How accessible is it for you? How often can you get down and bait? Again, some lakes, when they're busier, I would learn that I couldn't get away with baiting every day because 9 times often someone would be there that would stop me being able to bait. So then you go, okay, change your plan. Rather than go once every other day, I'm going to go once a week, big hit of bait. Get it done when you have the opportunity to do so. So like it changes it will change all the time.
That's where the seed comes into its own, because it creates more longevity to the spots. If you want to give them one big hit and leave it for 3-4 days, you can't beat the seed.
No.
But again, I've known lads that have turned up to lakes with a kilo of boilies and they put that 1 kilo in every night or every other night, just catapult onto, and they've done incredibly well. But I've never been in a position where I could do that type. So it's all about, again, what suits your time and, you know, the time you've got and how local you are to the lake, really.
Like consistent bait, like you've got, like what Thomas mentioned there is you've got a guy coming down every day to put a kilo out. The key word there being consistency. He's consistently turning up to the lake to bait. Therefore, every day when the fish turn up, there's food there because he's putting it there every day. You can put enough food out for a 5-day period. You can put it all out in one go. You still have consistency because it may take them 5 days to eat all that bait. So you end up with the same scenario. Every day when the fish turn up, there's bait there. It's no different to turning up every day and putting it out a little bit at a time. That's the important thing with baiting, is like that there's no point baiting a spot once and
consistency. Whatever you're doing, consistency is
whether it's little
or often, or one big hit a week. Consistency is key, because however good that spot is, if you decide one week, I can't be bothered to bait this Sunday, I need to get home or whatever, that opportunity is going to drift away. You know that you are training them to that spot, and as easy sometimes as it seems to train them to a spot, it's just as easy for them to drift off and go and find somebody else's bait, or you know.
Because you probably ain't the only one trying to do it either.
No. Listen, lads, that was mega. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I've learnt a bit. I want to ask you before we finish, though. You're both probably going fishing next week. What are you taking? In fact, you might not be because they've spawned, but...
No, I am going fishing next week. It is a tough one because the lake, obviously, Stone Acres, is shut now for spawning. I've spent this week at home. I have been busy with doing stuff with the family or whatever, so but I am missing fishing already because I've not been for about 6 days now. But I will take quite a lot of bait. But because I am turning again, because I haven't, you know, I can get where I want to be as such, or I'd like to think I can. I'll probably take a lot of boilie, a sweet corn, something I've started using a lot more now because I can take it in tins. It sits in the van. I'll still use, because of the time of the year now, and I know that the lake I'll probably be going to next week, they have spawned, I'll still take a lot of bait. But whether I take seed or not, you know, I think seed, as good as it is and how good I've been, you need a bit of time to get it going. And whereas I can turn up now to a lake, get on them, because I've got the time, and I'll find more. It's just things like sweet corn, boilies. They're just more instant, aren't they? So that's probably what I'll take next week. Load of sweet corn, load of boilies.
Yeah.
Hope that I can get on them.
Hemp, tigers and boilies.
Yeah. Okay, nice.
Lots.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Been an eye-opener.
It's been a pleasure, Rich. Thank you.
Cheers, boys.
The Thinking Tackle Podcast.